We have a nice big full table here at Face the Nation. I want to welcome everyone. CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion joins Scott MacFarlane. Also, we have New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker and New Yorker staff writer Susan Glasser. Susan and Peter, I want to also let you know, are co-authors of a new book on the Trump presidency called The Divider. It's great to have you all with us. Susan and Peter, I want to start with you. To what degree did what you just saw with Kari Lake, who many in the Trump world regard as a fast-rising star, reinforce what you write about in The Divider?
Well, thank you very much, Major. I was really struck in your interview with her that the Trumpist style in American politics, a la the famous paranoid style in American politics, seems to be with us. Whether or not Trump himself is literally on the ballot, I think that Kari Lake is an example. First of all, she was rerunning a Trump play from the 2018 midterm elections, which did not work, by the way, in which he falsely claimed that there was an invasion at the southern border and actually sent real U.S. military troops to defeat this fake invasion. You have her and other candidates now using this language of invasion. I think we should point out, as a matter of fact, that we are not actually experiencing an invasion, number one. Number two, you have brazenness, I think, as a superpower. And so you have, for Donald Trump, right, he's willing to go anywhere, to say anything. And one thing he's found is that millions will follow him. For example, in the election lies about 2020, interestingly, in your interview, she was not willing to actually come out and say that Joe Biden was not
what
the
Blake
legitimate.
Masters said.
Absolutely.
Running for the Senate as a Republican in Arizona.
Even though they've all sought Trump's endorsement on the basis that they endorse his false claims. Very interesting. Does that mean that they can't quite fully imitate Donald Trump?
Peter, and yet, I think it's important to put the and yet. Kari Lake is running neck and neck in Arizona. Donald Trump got millions more votes when he ran for re-election in 2020 and 2016. What does that tell you?
Yeah. Well, we call the book The Divider not because Trump created the divisions in our society, but he manifested them. He's the manifestation of them, and he figured out how to exploit them politically. And what we're now seeing is whether his inheritors, if you will, can then translate that same style, that same technique and approach on the state level in places like Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and so forth. And the answer right now is they have a real strong support. It's a very evenly divided country. When you see these battleground states at 50-50, it tells you that the Trump part of the country is not just a minority. It's a significant part of America. We have to confront that one way or the other. And it can't be dismissed. This is something that's going to outlast Trump himself.
Do you think that voters drawn to it are wrong to be drawn to it, or that is an acceptable alternative in American politics, and that there is something Democrats are missing about this particular approach?
Yeah, there's a politics of grievance, right? What Trump successfully tapped into is a sense out there of resentment among a lot of Americans who feel like the elites in some fashion or another have let them down, whether the elites be, in Washington or in their state capitals. It's also dividing, of course, along racial lines, along cultural lines, along ethnic and income lines. And it's been a successful trademark in this era. And the question is, how do you address those concerns in a way that doesn't exacerbate the divisions instead of, bring people together?
Nikole, you're on Capitol Hill, but you've also been traveling. What have you been seeing in relation to the things that Peter and Susan have been talking about? I know you were recently in Georgia. There's a Trump preferred candidate there, had a very stressful week. Catch us up.
Well, that's right. And in terms of Herschel Walker, for now, the party seems to be standing with him. And so our voters are willing to look past his faults. But I think it's yet another example of, many voters being willing to accept anything. At one point in our races, the issue of candidate quality was something that meant a lot. But now you have candidates who deny elections, candidates who may have had past transgressions, and yet, voters are willing to look past that. So,
and in the case of the Georgia race, it's not just a transgression, it's something that fundamentally disagrees with what his position is, if I understand it correctly, on access to abortion.
Well, absolutely. This is somebody who has been staunchly anti-abortion, doesn't support abortion with exceptions, but yet these reports have started to come out that at one point in time he paid for an abortion for a girlfriend, perhaps encouraged her to get an abortion on a second opportunity. And so that didn't happen. This woman claims to be the mother of his child. Again, CBS News has not been able to independently verify some of those claims, but it does raise questions about where he comes down on this issue. And this race is critical. I mean, this race could really decide control of the Senate. And so this is kind of a make or break moment for his campaign.
Scott, you watch the trials, the prosecutions resulting from January 6, 2021 very closely, but you also keep a very close eye on the atmospherics around the Capitol and the midterm elections itself. What is the sense of risk that members of Congress seeking re-election feel they are under, either at home or in the Capitol itself?
Significantly growing risk. In just a year's time, the Capitol Police have investigated thousands of potential threats against members of Congress. And then the Justice Department reveals that it has a task force that is also reviewing hundreds, if not thousands, of potential threats. And the political impact of this aside, and there may be a significant political impact to election denialism and questioning the integrity of elections, let's talk about the blocking and tackling of administering elections. It puts that at risk as well. You chronicle this well in your book. But I'll add, I talked to the elections administrator in Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County, Michigan, a purple county in Michigan, concerned about threats against her poll workers, concerned about recruiting poll workers, finding people to come in and want a piece of that. And we know that some of the administrators of elections nationwide are trying to recruit law students, American Bar Association-related volunteers, somebody to come man the polls in this uniquely toxic environment.
Toxic environment, Susan, does that feel like something that will be inevitable, not only in this midterm election, it's not going to go away, clearly we know that. Will this toxicity, should we assume it will continue all the way up to 2024, possibly beyond?
Yeah, I think it's not just a matter of rhetoric, right? It's, structural changes that are being made in our politics. You have Trump, who's reoriented the Republican Party and radicalized it. The Washington Post reported this week that 299 nominees, Republican nominees for House, Senate, and major statewide posts are election deniers, including in some will be in key races where they are determining the counting and the certification of votes going forward. And by the way, many of those Republican nominees are in safe Republican seats, so they're now guaranteed to have essentially a wave of Trumpian shock troops who have made election denialism a foundation of the Republican Party's new ideology. So it's not just a matter of rhetoric. I think we're changing the structure of American politics in ways that are designed to exacerbate this ongoing crisis in American democracy.
Nikole, it's pretty clear if you look at the spending patterns in some of the Senate races, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, dramatic examples of this. On the Republican side, more than half of the money spent on TV advertising is about crime. To what degree do you see that playing as a potentially pivotal issue in the midterms?
Well, it certainly is a Republican talking point and an issue that they want to put front and center. I was just in Wisconsin over the weekend and talked to Senator Johnson, who is going for his third term, and he did say that he feels that that should be a defining issue in this election. On the flip side, though, in terms of his opponent, he has tried to paint him as someone who is soft on crime, but in terms of Mandela Barnes, his approach has really been making this abortion rights issue, which we have seen Democrats time and again in a lot of these Senate races really try to bring that to the fore. So, again, kind of as Anthony pointed out earlier, I think it's, each party has a different narrative, and it's a matter of which one is going to rise to the top.
Peter, in your book with Susan, do you deduce anything that you think is of lasting and positive value from the Trump years?
Well, look, I think it's reinforced this conversation about what our democracy is and should be, right? And it's forced us to look at the structure, as Susan said, of our politics and of our system. But I think that what the concern is, we don't know where it's going to lead us. Do we reaffirm our commitment to this system that we created 240 years ago, or are we going to find ourselves lost? And I think that that's the big question heading into 2024.
I mean, if the former president were sitting here, he said, I'd improve the economy, I made American foreign policy stronger. Would you say any of that has a validity based on all the research that went into the book?
There are a lot of voters out there who say, look, I like Donald Trump because I like some of the things he accomplished. He did like tax cuts or a conservative Supreme Court justice or regulation cuts or what have you. But the question that's raised, at least certainly in our book, goes beyond a specific Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative ideological fight. It goes to the larger questions of what we want to be as a country. And I think that's what makes Trump unique. He's not like other Republicans or Democrats. It's not about policy. It's not about where health care should be or tax cuts. It's about whether you believe in the system that we created.
It is a time for uniqueness and larger questions, to be sure. Peter Baker, Susan Glasser, Nikole Killion, Scott MacFarlane, thank you so very much.